First job, cut these plywood panels up into smaller parts.
Hi everyone, my name's Robin Lewis, and in this video I'm going to be making a cube storage unit. The majority of this project is made using 19mm plywood that I salvaged from my neighbor's new house when they were building it. This is also the same material that I used to make a TV cabinet a few videos ago.
With all the outside panels cut, I can turn my attention to cutting the rebates and dados.
And the reason I'm adding these dados is slightly for strength, but mostly so that when it comes time to glue this all up, all of the parts go in place where they should be and they stay there while clamps are applied.
I've dry fitted the outside panels, everything looks good, I'm happy with the fit. The next thing is to add the dividers, and to start with I'm going to be routing the dados for them.
Because this plywood was just slightly oversized, I needed to make it a bit thinner to fit into the slots that I created earlier. So I'm running it through the thicknesser, but I'm just taking off a fine amount, just enough so that it slots into those dados. Here I'm setting up to glue the dividers into the middle shelf. From one side I'm going to be able to come in with screws, but from the other side when it's blocked I need something. So for that I'm going to use dowels. I went into more detail on this on the first video where I made that TV cabinet.
This is a quick release clamp. It's one of my cheaper ones, which is why I use it for this. And what I've done is I've inverted it. So you can see the pads are flipped the other way around. Some of them can do this, some of them can't. So one of these works perfect for this job. You can put it in, and now when you squeeze, instead of squeezing together, it squeezes apart. I can now use that, and then we'll force this up. And now I can slide the panel in, no problem.
This unit is mostly going to be storing my child's toys, so anywhere where there's some kind of a corner or edge, it's going to be rounded over either with a router or sandpaper. While the filler's drying, I'm going to get started on the boxes, and this is where things might become a bit interesting. You might remember from the TV cabinet build that I got all of this plywood free. It was the offcuts from my neighbor's new subfloor. But this is all that I have left. The goal here is to use this as much as possible and buy as little plywood as possible. With all of the parts for the boxes cut, I could turn my attention back to the main unit. The filler had dried, so I sanded that back and then painted 3 coats of this white over the entire unit. I also like to add a couple coats of water-based polyurethane to projects like this, because the polyurethane is a very hard-wearing finish. So it means really the paint underneath can be any kind of paint, because the strength, the hard-wearing finish is going to come from that clear polyurethane. Although it is worth mentioning that that polyurethane will slightly yellow the color of the paint, even though it's water-based polyurethane. So bear that in mind, that white paint that you use might not be as white as it was in a couple of months. So in the end, I had to go out and buy some plywood for these boxes. I just didn't have enough. So this is some 12mm ply that's going to go on the bottom, and I used some 7mm ply for the fronts. These boxes are nothing fancy. They're simply glued and screwed in place. There's a lot of videos out there about making boxes quote unquote correctly with floating panels, etc. But really, because this is all plywood and I just really want a simple box, gluing and screwing is going to be more than enough, and it's certainly strong enough. The goal with these boxes is that they're not going to stay in the unit. The entire box is going to be pulled out when it's in use. So with that in mind, I didn't want any screws showing, so the screws that you see me putting in earlier, those are simply to clamp the box together while the glue dries. Once the glue had dried, I could remove those screws, take it over to the drill press and drill through for some 8mm dowels. It just gives it a much nicer overall look when you have the box out of the unit. These are some 1.8 meter long, 300mm wide finger jointed oak panels. I'm going to be using a bigger one later on for the top. Using my homemade track, I cut that panel down lengthways. That would be the height of the box openings, and then I could cut that panel into 3 different sections. In the next step, I'm going to be adding some felt tape to the underside of the boxes. That's essentially going to be the runners for these boxes. But that felt tape won't stick to wood, so I had to put a couple coats of polyurethane underneath first. That felt tape is also going to cover the screw heads on the underside of the box. And while yes, it is the underside of the box, so you probably won't see it all that often, the idea was to try and not have any hardware showing. Now that the felt strips had been added, I had the final height of the boxes within the cavity. So from here I could add the box front to that. You'll also notice that I'm adding a thin 1.5mm shim underneath the box front before I attach it. And that's so that that box front will never touch the floor or hit the inside of the cavity. It's only ever going to be the felt tape that's going to make contact with the surface. And then with the box front attached to the box, I could drill through with a thin bit, remove the box front, and then using a 25mm spade bit, drill out the finger hole. Then on the box itself, I followed through that pilot hole from earlier with a bigger hole. I think it was 38mm. And that way, as the box front shrinks and expands with seasonal changes, you're not going to see the box behind it showing through because that's a larger hole. This is the big oak panel that I mentioned earlier. I lined it up on top and then using one of those 90-degree bend drill bits extender things, I was able to put some screws through the inside of the cabinet into that oak top.
Now, realistically, this is probably a 2-man lift, but I don't have anyone here today, so I'm just gonna give it a go and fingers crossed I should get it up in one piece.
I live in a high-set Queenslander, which basically means my house is on stilts. This workshop is underneath it. So anytime I make furniture for the house, it's got to go up exactly 13 steps before it gets inside.
Here it comes.
One eternity later.
Okay, it all went well. So here it is, all completed, and I'm really happy with how this one turned out. It's one of those projects that came together very slowly, and by the end of it, I was just looking to get it done because it was just something that needed to be built for this room. But now looking at it and the whole design and how it's turned out, I really like this project. As I've said a number of times in this video, this is made to match the TV cabinet, which is a similar shape and design. All the lines are very similar. It's the same wood and it's the same color paint. One thing that I did have to do in particular with this build is raise it up a little bit, and that's why I've got these feet down below. This slides over my NBN or internet box just behind it, and it was out by probably about 10 mil. So I put some of these big chunky feet on. That allows me to slide the whole unit back over that box, and all the Wi-Fi modem and router, all of the optical box, they're all hidden behind this, which was always the original goal. Just a quick tour of how this all works. The drawer can be pulled completely out of its housing. The toys can be removed and scattered all over the lounge, of course. Then once they're all put in, the box goes back into place. Sometimes it does need a bit of adjustment to actually get into place, but I guess that's what you buy into when a drawer like this isn't on runners. This particular box is going to be adjusted going forward. So I'm going to pull this out very gently because my Wi-Fi router is actually in this box. And you can see through into the back. Let me see if I can get some more light in here. You can see at the back is the box that I was talking about. That's where my optical line comes into the house, and then just next to that is a plug point. So the idea was for this entire unit to just slip over both of those, and then you don't see them. You might be thinking to yourself, well, that's gonna ruin the signal coming off of this Wi-Fi router, but I have tested it and it's really not that bad. This is quite a high-end router. I've checked it all around the house and I get pretty much the same signal really anywhere I go. You may have also noticed that I didn't put a back panel on this unit, and that's because I wanted to have access to the back of it when it's pushed up against the wall. On the TV cabinet, I did put a back panel on and it was fine, but it means that any adjustments that you want to make behind the unit have to be done from the side. Having this open back means I can pull out the drawers, access all of the plugs and wires, and it makes life so much easier. Generally, a back panel like that is put on to keep the entire unit rigid, to stop it racking side to side. And really, this thing is so solid, I'm not worried about it racking at all. I brought it up here by myself, manhandled it up the stairs, and it didn't budge at all. So that back panel isn't entirely necessary, and as I say, having access to the back of it, so good. My name is Robin Lewis, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.